Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Don Lemon Show. You know, Donald Trump's return to the White House and his subsequent moves to take a blowtorch to DEI programs has led many to declare that the progressive wokeness movement is dead. And we're going to talk about that in this episode. Dead and buried, not 6 feet under, but 60 feet under, as a matter of fact. But what if I told you something may be rising up to take its place? I think you might be surprised about what it is, because it is the woke right. Yeah, the woke right, not the woke left. It's just as eerie as it sounds. To define the woke right and talk about all of its implications, I am happy to be joined by Thomas Chatterton Williams. He's a staff writer at The Atlantic and the author of Losing My Cool and Self-Portrait in Black and White. Thomas, good to see you again. How are you?
Great to see you, Don. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
You have everybody not chattering, but chattering about the woke right. So I want to ask you this before we even get into the woke right. I just want to take a step back and have you expand on what you think wokeness is, as in OG wokeness. You know what I mean? Because right, it tends to be different for everyone. And let me just say, in your essay, this is what you write. I'm going to quote here. You said, one of the defining features of the social justice orthodoxy that swept through American culture between roughly the death of Trayvon Martin in 2012 to Hamas's assault on Israel in 2023 was the policing of language, you write. Many advocates became obsessed with enforcing syntactical etiquette and banishing certain words. Can you say more? Is it just about the policing of language? How do you see this?
Sure. Yeah, no, not at all. The policing of language is one element of it, because one of the, wokeness is this nebulous kind of word that I don't love. I never loved it when it was applied to the kind of social justice orthodoxy that really defined the 2010s, peaked in the summer of 2020, and then fizzled out by 2023 or so. But that's the term that we have. And one of the defining features of it is this kind of need to politicize all aspects of life. So what type of books you read, what words you use, language becomes very important, and the control of language, the assertion of authority over language becomes a very important exercise of power. The guiding way of seeing all politics and social interaction is of power relations, in that there are two different classes of people. There is the oppressor and the oppressed. And victimization, the victim status, becomes a kind of an entitlement to do away with the norms of polite society, to stop business as usual. We're in a state of emergency. Society must be remade. There's no time for being neutral. That only reinforces the status quo. So this sense of aggrievement really fuels wokeness, and a self-righteous need to dispense with due process and things like this. And so then there's always a power relation perceived in every aspect of our collective lives. Language is, of course, how we mediate our collective lives.
Well, it was supposed to be about just being aware of the inequities in society, right? But it's sort of morphed into what you're saying, where it became virtue signaling. Don't you think? Did it become I'm better than you, and if you're not as good as me and don't live up to the ideals that I believe, then you must be cast aside and banished with a scarlet letter. And maybe that's a bit extreme.
Yeah, no, I don't. I actually
don't. It had become a religion.
It became cult-like and even religious in its fervor. And there's nothing like the fervor of the new convert. And it was an unforgiving religion. It was the worst kind of religion, a religion without grace. So there was a constant need for scapegoating when the left really controlled that energy in society. But what is happening now is that energy has drifted to an ascendant right that does see itself as equally victimized and aggrieved, that sees identity as central to its victimization and centers whiteness this way, and also has married that sense of aggrievement and that desire to see things as a state of emergency, suspend norms, to actual government power, which the left didn't really have.
Okay, so this is you're describing the woke right now, but the woke right, are you saying it has more power in their wokeness? And is it a mirror? Is it the reverse of the woke left, or is it just the woke left but with actual political power?
I think it's exercising many of the same impulses, but it's playing out in society differently, because where the left really exercised hegemony, really had control, was within cultural institutions, essentially within media organizations, within universities, within Hollywood, within the Guggenheim Museum. Places like this became fully under the influence of a kind of social justice orthodoxy. What the woke right has done is captured the Republican Party and has taken over. They have beaten back actual conservatives and are implementing their kind of punitive program with the force of the state. And we're only seeing that. We've seen a month of that, and it has actually been terrifying so far.
This seems more dangerous than the woke left in some ways.
I would
absolutely. The power of prosecution and not just persecution.
Yeah, I would say that if you want to be completely fair-minded, you would have to say that it's far more disturbing if there's a kind of woke right takeover of the Department of Defense than if there's a woke right takeover of the New York Times, even though I think that has serious implications for our democracy as well.
You talk about how a hallmark of both the woke left and the woke right is, and I quote here, impulse to contest and revise the historical record in service of contemporary debates. Give me examples of that. Explain what you mean by that.
Yes, history is always contested and in play. So, who controls the narrative of who we are has a lot of power, or who we have been and where we come from has a lot of power over who we are today. So, one of the examples that really still astonishes me from the kind of feverish 2019, 2020, 2021 era is the New York Times Magazine's 1619 Project, when they reimagined the founding of the United States. They did away with historical rigor in certain cases, even disregarded the objections of historians that fact-checked the project, because it was in order of scoring certain debate points about who is a victim and who is oppressed and who was the oppressor. Now you see the same thing happening in ways that are even more alarming. You see a revision of even the moral standing of Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich in Nazi Germany. You see a kind of willingness to push the boundaries of what is accepted as our agreed upon past. You see Elon Musk, who's certainly a player in this kind of culture, signaling to the far right descendants of the Nazi Party, the AfD in Germany, that it's time to rethink our relationship to that past. So I think it's quite a dangerous game whenever anybody tries to manipulate the shared facts that we use to navigate our collective life. You see also the language and the kind of revision of history come into play, both language and history, with the need to create neologisms like the Gulf of America when Trump plays that game. But this also has echoes in the power games of the woke left during 2020, when every statue needed to be renamed, and when the Woodrow Wilson Center at Princeton University had to be renamed. It's this desire to strip the past of its power to mean something to us and to implement a new meaning on top of it that serves the interests of that group.
Look, I understand. I understand that. I believe it went too far. Obviously, I think the pendulum swung too far in one way. I could, like the Woodrow Wilson Center, okay, like, why are we doing that? But I can understand why Black parents might not want their Black kids to go to a Robert E. Lee High School, considering, which I don't think is a big deal to change the name of a high school, but to change like a Woodrow Wilson library or whatever, I think that's a bridge too far. And I believe the Gulf of America is a bridge too far as well. I want to play this. This is a White House spokesperson, Caroline Leavitt. Watch this.
Was very upfront in my briefing on day one that if we feel that there are lies being pushed by outlets in this room, we are going to hold those lies accountable. And it is a fact that the body of water off the coast of Louisiana is called the Gulf of America. And I'm not sure why news outlets don't want to call it that, but that is what it is. The Secretary of Interior has made that the official designation in the geographical identification name server, and Apple has recognized that. Google has recognized that. Pretty much every other outlet in this room has recognized that body of water as the Gulf of America, and it's very important to this administration that we get that right, not just for people here at home, but also for the rest of the world.
Okay, I played that because you note that in both forms of wokeness, corporations play a huge role. They play huge roles as enforcers. You heard her mention Google. She mentioned Apple.
Mm-hmm.
And just recently, they relabeled the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, and they did it in their mapping applications on Google and Apple as well. How important is corporate submission to power? How important is it on the woke right?
Well, I think we're going to see, but so far the indications have been pretty alarming. I think from the inauguration, from that moment when you saw Trump surrounded by the most powerful tech CEOs in the country, and then you immediately saw the kind of changes that Mark Zuckerberg was implementing at Meta, and he went on his press tour to explain his new thinking. To align himself with the kind of not just with the policies of the regime, but with the kind of ethos of the regime. I think it's important to marinate on the role that corporations play in being enablers of this kind of institutional change. During the Great Awakening, as it's called, of the 2010s, when social justice orthodoxy was ascendant. I mean, these are the same corporations that made it very difficult to think independently from that guiding ethos. Fundamentally, wokeness, and the clip you just played really drives this point home. It revolves around an ethos of bullying and of
Right.
scapegoating. And so, that was a power play that the administration was making by calling out the Associated Press and forcing them to submit or be made an example of. And one of the ways that wokeness, it derives its power from that related term that's not perfect, but is what we're left with, cancel culture. So they make an example of canceling the Associated Press, and then you have this onlooker effect where all the other press realizes that they either toe the line or they will be cast out as well. And so you don't have to cancel everybody. You just have to make examples of people who are punished to make a display of power. And so the corporations actually in the beginning, they have an ability to resist these kinds of moves before they take hold, but they often don't. And that's what's so concerning about, what happened at Meta and Google and places like this during the 2010s, and then Harvard and the universities, when you had to be forced to sign the compelled speech of, diversity statements. If you're being hired to teach physics, you had to sign a statement on how you would work to further diversity ends that maybe you have no familiarity with and aren't really relevant to your field. And now you have to do things that are compelled speech on the other side, like tell the authoritarian leader that you agree with his neologism. I mean, it's absurd. And, like liberals on the left of center and good faith conservatives on the center right are being squeezed between both of these extremes that kind of feed off of each other, feed off of the energy that each movement makes as the pendulum swings back and forth. And somehow we've got to get a hold of our senses and return to the process, the values that don't favor one cult-like movement or another, depending on the whims of which way the pendulum is swinging.
It appears to me that on the left, it's a kind of soft power, right? A power of persuasion, and as I said, virtue signaling. And on the right, there's much more of the state that is involved that can pressure you to either comply, right, or you're going to be cast out. One seems to be a canceling, and the other one seems to be a complete casting out with no means of returning. Well, I think they're both kind of that way. I mean, and you mentioned the social media owners, not just social media owners, but even newspaper owners, like the Bezoses and all of that, billionaires who control the narrative and control algorithms. And so when you mention that, it's much more, I think you said we should be much more concerned about the woke right than the woke left. It appears to be much more of a strong arm tactic rather than on the left.
Well, yeah, I know, I'd be very careful I wouldn't say that Bezos or Zuckerberg or people like this were ever woke on the left before, and I don't think that they're woke right now. They're simply moving with where the culture has moved.
And the power.
And the power, exactly. They're just reading, the writing on the wall. they're not true believers. But the true believers capture institutions, and it is always. I want to be very clear. It's much more serious when the levers of governmental power are captured by this kind of fanaticism. And we've seen, Florida under DeSantis for the past few years has been a kind of laboratory of the woke right. They've banned books. They've made certain speech in schools and public institutions unspeakable. They have actually instituted laws that incentivize people to snitch on their colleagues. The hallmarks of the kind of informal policing and surveillance that was instituted in places like the New York Times and elsewhere under the social justice orthodoxy of wokeness. But it's much more concerning when that's coming from the governor or the president or the vice president.
Right.
So I don't want to make a false equivalency there, but it's extraordinarily harmful, and it can be very, very dangerous to have, extraordinarily influential institutions that are informally governed by mob justice, by scapegoating, by compelled speech, by false preference falsification, saying you believe things you don't believe, being quiet about things you believe because you can't say them. These things are extremely dangerous when they're implemented informally as well.
Don't you think it's extremely? I think it's extremely dangerous, especially with the media, because then it appears that you have an administration that is trying to control the media, and if you don't comply with them, then you're out, you're gone, no access.
That's right. There's. I mean, I can't say. I wanted to say there's no respect for the media as an industry under the woke right regime, but I don't find that there was an enormous amount of respect from the kind of woke insurgents in the 2010s and around the summer of, the racial reckoning and the pandemic and all that either. I don't think that either of them have a genuine respect for the neutrality and objectivity or the striving for those ideals that is fundamental to sound and good reporting that makes democracy work. I think both of them would dispose of those things for what they call moral clarity, or for making the right point of view prevail over the wrong point of view. And that's just antithetical to how a liberal society, an open democracy functions. Moral clarity is necessarily subjective. Everybody who wields it believes that they're right and someone else that they're opposing is wrong. That's why you have to step into a realm of what we try to be calling objectivity, even though it's flawed.
Mm-hmm. Your piece seems to convey that the woke right is really doomed to fail, and you argue that voters seem done with woke antics in all of its forms. I mean, you have any evidence to point to that? Because it seems like we're just in the beginning of the woke right.
Well, I mean, Donald Trump's approval ratings are plummeting.
They are,
as the policies are being implemented, and as people are seeing the chaos that's coming from this kind of ideological zeal. Elon Musk's favorability ratings have been plummeting. Most voters are not up on every new debate. Most voters tune in here or there. There's been lots of research by organizations like More in Common, a really smart think tank that's based in both France and the United States and tries to measure polarization. For the past few years, they've shown that the overwhelming majority of voters, regardless of which way the election sways, really are not comfortable with the activist far left woke identity politic players or the far right kind of activist fundamentalist make America great again culture warriors. They want something like normal prosperity and sound governance. Yeah, and they actually don't like the kind of forever culture wars. Most people don't actually like that. Trump won by the slimmest of margins. He won, as we know, by less than Hillary Clinton lost by in terms of the popular vote.
Don't tell them that. They're going to cancel you if you say that.
But it's just,
it was, it was a mandate.
Yeah, exactly. That's part of the story they tell to promote this false idea that they have a kind of, moral majority, which they don't. Most people really did, I think, want an end to the madness that we were subjected to. Make no mistake, we were subjected to true madness. I spent the past few years writing a book about the summer of 2020 and what led up to it and the aftermath and what we went through, because I'm afraid that in the kind of rush to respond to the crisis of the far right moment that we're in now, we are memory holding some of the extraordinary suspension of liberal norms that we were subjected to 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. It was not, it wasn't the Obama era that I kind of look back on with a fondness, and it wasn't even the Bush era. It was a moment of exception, when you had people writing op-eds at the New York Times and the Washington Post saying that actually free speech is a luxury we can't afford. And at the time, there were liberal voices who said, are you so sure you want to part with values like freedom of expression? Because that is a weapon that anyone can pick up and wield. And we may not always be in power. We may not always be the people that can implement that decision. You should protect speech you don't agree with, because somebody else can turn around and say you set the precedent. And now we're seeing that we're reaping the results of that.
Yeah. Fascinating. I don't know if we're ever going to get back to that normalcy that you spoke of. I think it's going to be quite a while because, Donald Trump is considered, at least that folks on his side are wondering if he can run for a third term. So the woke right might last a lot longer than you think, Mr. Williams.
Oh, I'm afraid they might last.
Thank you. Thomas Chatterton Williams. Thank you so much. The piece is in The Atlantic, and it's the rise of the woke right. Make sure you check it out. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Don.
Thanks everyone for watching. Your support means the world to us. So make sure you hit the like button and you subscribe to our channel to make sure that you never ever miss a video. We're live every day, 10 a.m. Eastern time. We drop even more content at 2 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Eastern. And if you want more Don Lemon Show content, we'd love for you to become a member of the Lemon community, where you will receive access to special community posts. You'll get exclusive content and members-only live shows. So head over to our channel page or click the join button on this video. Again, thank you for watching. We appreciate your love and your support, and we will see you next time.